I'd rather chew glass than touch that cow. That's what I heard through a gap in a rented tent wall, champagne in one hand, my heart in the other. My future son-in-law said it about my daughter. Then he laughed. His buddy laughed harder, and I stood there in a blazer I'd bought for the occasion, feeling my whole face go numb. Like someone had unplugged me from the party and left me standing in the wreckage of it. I didn't storm in. I didn't throw a punch. I finished my champagne, set the glass down very carefully, and smiled at the next person who congratulated me. I didn't know it yet, but that smile was the last honest thing I'd give that family for the rest of the night. Everything after it was a performance. And I am, it turns out, a very good actor when the stakes are this personal. Welcome back. Pour your coffee, settle in, and get ready, because in these stories, karma always finds the address. Subscribe so you never miss what happens next. My name is Edward Ellis. I'm 54 years old. I've spent 30 of those years running a small logistics company out of a strip mall office that smells permanently like burnt coffee. And until that night, I thought the worst thing that could happen at my daughter's engagement party was the caterer running out of shrimp. I was wrong, and by the time the night was over, I would learn something about that family that would end their golden boy's wedding, gut his father's reputation, and leave me standing over the wreckage with a glass of champagne, completely, unapologetically sober. Let me back up, because you need to understand what my daughter meant to me before you understand what I was willing to do to protect her. I was 29, just 4 days shy of my 30th birthday, when Victoria was born, and I remember the exact weight of her in my arms in the hospital, in a room that smelled like disinfectant, and the cheap flowers I'd bought from the gift shop downstairs, because I hadn't planned ahead, and Crystal never let me forget it. I remember thinking, with the particular terror of a brand new father, that I would never again in my life be able to relax completely, because there would always be this small, breathing thing in the world that I needed to keep safe. 26 years later, that feeling hadn't faded one bit. If anything, it had gotten sharper, because a grown daughter can get hurt in ways a baby can't. A baby can't fall in love with the wrong man and hand him her whole future wrapped in a bow. My daughter Victoria is the best thing I ever helped make. Smart, stubborn, funny in that dry way that skips a generation and lands exactly on you when you least expect it. She graduated top of her nursing class, worked long shifts in a hospital ICU without complaining once, and still found time to call her mother every single week just to check in. She's the kind of person who remembers your coffee order after meeting you once, and 6 months before that party, she came home glowing, waving a ring in front of her mother's face like she'd just won a prize on a game show. Mom, Dad, look, my wife, Crystal, screamed loud enough that our neighbor's dog started barking 2 houses down. I hugged my daughter and shook the hand of the man she loved. His name was Dustin. Dustin came from money. Not the kind of money that builds something, the kind that's been sitting in a trust fund so long it's grown moss. His father, Arthur, owned half of downtown in some capacity I never fully understood, something involving commercial real estate and a country club membership he mentioned within 4 minutes of meeting me. His mother, Hilda, wore sunglasses indoors and called our modest split-level house cozy, in a tone that made the word sound like an insult. I didn't love Dustin. I want to be honest about that, because a man who tells you he adored his daughter's fiancé right up until the moment he destroyed him is a man selling you something. I tolerated Dustin. I watched him. There was a smoothness to him that never sat right with me, the kind of charm that works great in a boardroom and terribly at a dinner table, because it never turns off. Not even for the people who are supposed to matter most. Victoria didn't see it. Love does that. It's not blindness, exactly. It's more like a very selective flashlight. And she kept pointing hers at all the good parts of him and none of the bad. You don't like him, Crystal said to me once, stacking dishes after a family dinner. I like him fine, I said. Edward, I said I like him fine. She gave me the look she'd been giving me for more than 26 years of marriage, the one that means I know you're lying and I'm going to let you get away with it for now. I let it go. Victoria was happy. That was supposed to be enough. There was a dinner, maybe 2 months before the engagement, where Dustin spent the entire meal talking about a deal his father had closed downtown, barely pausing to ask Victoria how her shift at the hospital had gone. She'd been on her feet for 11 hours. She'd lost a patient that morning, a man in his 80s, whose family hadn't made it to the hospital in time to say goodbye, and she came to dinner still carrying that weight behind her eyes. "You look tired," I said to her, passing the breadbasket. "I'm fine, Dad," she said, and she smiled, but it didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. Dustin didn't notice. Or he noticed and decided his father's real estate deal was more interesting. Either way, he kept talking, and I kept watching my daughter fold herself smaller and smaller in her chair until the meal ended, and I remember thinking, not for the first time, that a man who can't see exhaustion on the face of the woman he claims to love has no business promising to spend the rest of his life with her. I didn't say any of that out loud. I wish, looking back, that I had. But hindsight is a luxury, and at the time, all I had was a bad feeling and a breadbasket. The engagement party was Hilda's idea, held at a rented estate, with a tent big enough to house a small aircraft, string lights, a four-piece band, and a bar staffed by two men in vests, who kept refilling my glass whether I asked them to or not. Arthur gave a toast about the joining of two great families, which was rich, considering our family owns a Honda Civic with 200,000 miles on it, and theirs owns a boat named after a Roman emperor. Crystal was across the tent, deep in conversation with Hilda about flower arrangements, nodding along with the particular patience of a woman who has spent her whole life learning to smile through condescension. Victoria was somewhere near the dance floor, laughing at something one of her nursing friends had said. Her whole face lit up in a way that made my chest ache with how much I loved her. "Great turnout," a man I didn't recognize said to me, clapping me on the shoulder. "You must be proud. Marrying into money like this, that's not nothing." "I'm proud of my daughter," I said. "Every day, ring or no ring." He laughed like I'd made a joke, and I hadn't, but I let it go, because that's what you do at these parties. You let a lot of things go. I nodded politely, took my drink, and kept moving through the crowd, nodding at faces I half recognized from engagement photos and family group chats I'd been quietly added to, and even more quietly muted. I was heading toward the bar for water. Actual water. Not the kind that comes with bubbles and a lime you didn't ask for, when I passed behind the tent. Near where the caterers had set up a smoking area nobody was supposed to know about. And that's where I heard it. Dustin's voice, low, amused, talking to a guy I recognized as his best man, Jacob. "Man, I don't know how you're going to survive this weekend," Jacob said, laughing already, like he knew a good line was coming. "Barely," Dustin said. "You know what my mother said last night?" She said, "At least she's a nurse, she'll keep you healthy." I said I'd rather chew glass than touch that cow, but hey, the money's good, the wedding's paid for, and once the ring's on I don't have to try so hard. Jacob laughed. Really laughed. The kind of laugh you give when you agree completely and don't feel bad about it. I stood there, holding my champagne glass, and something in my chest went very quiet and very cold. I want to tell you I felt rage first. I didn't. Rage came later, and it came in waves, and it came for months. What I felt in that first moment was something closer to grief. The specific grief of watching your daughter hand her whole heart to someone, and realizing he was never going to deserve it. Not for one single day. Then the rage came, and with it, something else, something sharper. A plan. I didn't say anything that night. Not to Victoria, not to Crystal, not to Dustin, and God knows not to Jacob, whose laugh I now heard every time I closed my eyes. Instead, I did something small, something almost invisible. Dustin had set his champagne glass down on the bar to shake hands with some cousin of his. I picked it up on my way past, wrapped it in a cocktail napkin like I was helping the staff clean up, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Nobody notices a 54-year-old man in a blazer clearing a glass. That's the thing about being unremarkable. It's a superpower nobody warns you about. I drove home that night with Crystal asleep in the passenger seat, and a champagne glass wrapped in cloth sitting in my cup holder like a live grenade. "Why are you so quiet?" Crystal asked at a red light, half awake. "Long night," I said. "You didn't drink much." "I had plenty." She didn't push. She never pushes when I go quiet like that. 26 years teaches a person when to leave a door closed. I appreciated it that night more than she'll ever know. The next morning, before Crystal was even out of bed, I called my cousin Anita. Anita spent 18 years as a private investigator before she retired to spend her days annoying her husband and gardening tomatoes that never grow right. She's the kind of woman who solves a mystery the way other people solve a crossword, for fun, on a Sunday, with coffee. Edward Ellis, she said when she picked up. You never call unless something's wrong. Something's wrong, I said. I told her everything. The comment, the laugh, the glass in my cup holder. There was a long pause on the line. You want a DNA test, she said finally. It wasn't a question. I want to know who I'm dealing with, I said. I want to know everything about this family before my daughter marries into it. That's not a small ask, Edward. I'm not asking you to do it for free. I didn't say that. Another pause. I know a guy, runs a private lab, does discreet paternity work for lawyers, custody cases, that kind of thing. He owes me a favor from a case a while back I'd rather not discuss on the phone. Anita, what? Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when we know what we're dealing with. And Edward, you sure you want to open this door? Sometimes a glass is just a glass. Sometimes a bad word at a party is just a man who's had too much champagne and not enough sense. I heard what I heard, I said, and I know what I felt standing there. This isn't about one bad joke, Anita. This is a man who I don't trust with my daughter's heart, and I want to know why my gut's been screaming at me for 6 months. All right. I could hear her rustling papers on the other end, the sound of a woman already 3 steps ahead of the conversation. I'll call him tonight. How long will it take? Depends what he's got on his plate. A week, maybe less if I lean on him a little. Lean on him. I always do, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice, the particular satisfaction of a retired investigator who missed the work more than she ever admitted to her husband. Here's the part where I have to admit something. When I sent that glass off for testing, I wasn't thinking about paternity. I wasn't thinking about some grand secret buried in Dustin's bloodline. I was thinking, simply, that I wanted leverage. I wanted proof of who this man really was, something concrete enough to put in front of my daughter that wasn't just your father has a bad feeling. I thought maybe we'd find out he had a criminal record he'd hidden. Maybe a secret family. Maybe debt his trust fund was quietly covering. I was prepared for a lot of things. I was not prepared for what Anita called me about 4 days later. Edward, she said, and her voice had a strange flatness to it, the voice of someone delivering news they've read 3 times to make sure they weren't imagining it. You need to sit down. I'm sitting. I mean it. Sit down. I sat down. The lab ran the sample against the reference database they keep for regional paternity disputes. Standard practice, cross-checking for partial matches in case of fraud claims. Your future son-in-law's Dina came back with a familial match. A close one. Close how close? Parent-child close. I remember the exact spot on my kitchen floor where I was standing. I remember the hum of the refrigerator. I remember thinking, absurdly, that I needed to buy more coffee filters, because my brain reached for something small and stupid to hold on to, while the rest of it processed what Anita was telling me. Whose parent? I asked. Whose child? That's the thing, Edward. Her voice dropped lower. The database flagged a partial match to a sample already on file. A paternity case filed about 27 years ago. Contested, then quietly withdrawn. The father listed on that case. She said a name. I'm not going to write it here. Not yet, because I need you to sit in the same silence I sat in, on my kitchen floor, holding a phone against my ear like it might explode. The name she said was familiar. It took me a full 10 seconds to place it. It was my daughter's biological grandfather, Raymond, not Crystal's father. My father, Raymond Ellis, dead 6 years now, a man I'd buried with more complicated feelings than I like to admit, because my father was not always a kind man, and he was not always where he said he'd be, and there were stretches of my childhood when he disappeared for months at a time and came back with excuses instead of apologies. Explain it to me slowly, I said, because I'm not following. The lab flagged your daughter's fiancé as a paternal grandchild match to a man named Raymond Ellis, Anita said, which means somewhere along the line, one of Raymond's children, biologically speaking, is Dustin's parent. I'm Raymond's only child, I said. You're his only acknowledged child. Anita said gently. Edward, I think your father had another one. And I think that other child is somewhere in Dustin's family tree. That's insane, I said. My father was a lot of things, Anita, but he wasn't. He would have said something. Somebody would have known. Would they? Anita's voice was patient. The voice she must have used on 100 clients before me who didn't want to believe what the paperwork was telling them. Edward, you told me yourself your father disappeared for 2 years when you were 11. You told me your mother never asked where he'd been. People bury things. Families bury things. That's the whole reason I had a career. So what do we do with a partial match? That's not proof of anything. No, she agreed. It's a thread. And I'm going to pull it until it either falls apart in my hands or it doesn't. Give me some time. I sat on that kitchen floor for a long time after we hung up, staring at the refrigerator hum, running the math over and over in my head like it might change if I did it enough times. It never did. I need you to understand something about my father before I go further. Because his ghost is about to become the most important character in this story, and he's not even alive to defend himself. Which honestly, given what I was about to learn, is probably for the best. Raymond Ellis worked construction most of his life, moved crews around 3 states, and had what my mother used to call, with a tight little smile that never quite reached her eyes, a wandering nature. He was gone for 2 years when I was 11. Came back with a story about a job in another state and a duffel bag that smelled like someone else's laundry detergent. My mother never asked questions. I used to think that was weakness. Sitting on my kitchen floor at 54 years old, I understood it might have been self-preservation. I called Anita back the next morning. I need to know who this other child is, I said, and I need to know before the wedding. You need to know if it's not just a coincidence in a computer database, Anita said. Partial DNA matches happen. It's not nothing, but it's not proof of anything specific yet either. Then find the proof. Anita spent the next several weeks doing what Anita does best, which is being patient and terrifyingly thorough. She pulled property records. She dug through old employment rosters from the construction company my father worked for, cross-referencing crew assignments against the years he'd vanished from our lives. She tracked down an old friend of my father's, a man named Jacob, no relation to Dustin's best man. A coincidence that made me laugh bitterly more than once during this whole ordeal, who used to work the same construction crews decades ago, and now lived in a retirement community 2 states over. I remember your dad, this other Jacob told Anita, when she finally tracked him down over the phone, according to the notes she read me later. Big guy, funny, terrible with money. We worked a job together for the better part of 2 years, out of state, back when your boy Edward here was still in grade school. Did he ever mention a family back home? Anita asked him. Sure, sometimes. Mostly he didn't like to talk about it. Guilt, I figured. But he had a whole other thing going on out there too, if you understand what I'm saying. Your dad had a thing going with a woman on one of his out-of-state jobs, this other Jacob told Anita, according to the notes she read me over the phone. Everybody knew. Nobody said anything, because that's just how men were back then, especially your dad. She got pregnant. I remember him talking about it once, drunk, saying he sent money for a while, and then stopped. Did he ever say her name? Anita had pressed him. Jemai something. Real nice woman, from what I remember, worked at a diner near the site. Better than he deserved, if you ask me. He used to tell people back home he was working overtime. Real funny way of describing it. Anita spent another week chasing down public records under the name Jemai, cross-referencing old census data and school enrollment records from the town near that job site, until she finally found what she was looking for, a birth record, a name, and eventually, a trail that led straight to a woman who had grown up believing her father simply hadn't wanted her, never knowing he had another whole family 2 states away, pretending at Sunday dinners that nothing was missing. It's strange, Anita told me, near the end of that call. Your father built 2 entire lives, and never had the decency to let either one know the other existed. I've seen a lot of secrets in my time, Edward, but this one might take the cake. Don't say cake, I said. I'm never going to be able to eat cake again after this whole ordeal is over. She laughed, and for a moment, in the middle of all that dread, it felt good to laugh too. Sent money to who? I asked. Anita already had the answer. because Anita always gets the answer before you finish asking the question. A woman named Jemmy Calloway, she said, lived 2 states over, had a daughter in the early 90s, that daughter's name, according to public records, and a very useful old newspaper archive. Just tell me, I said. Hilda, Anita said. Edward, Hilda is your half-sister, which makes her son Dustin, your daughter's fiancé. I already knew what she was about to say. I said it for her, because some part of me needed to hear it in my own voice to believe it. Dustin is my nephew, I said, Victoria's cousin. The line was quiet for a moment. Half-cousin, Anita said, like that distinction was supposed to make it feel less like the floor had opened up under my entire family. But yes, blood relation, close enough that no judge, no doctor, and no decent human being is going to call it a coincidence. Here's where the story could have ended 100 ways. I could have called Crystal and Victoria into the living room that same night and told them everything, plainly, painfully, and let the family absorb the blow in private, the way normal families absorb bad news. I want you to remember, though, what I heard through that tent wall. I'd rather chew glass than touch that cow. Dustin didn't just insult my daughter. He humiliated her, in front of a friend, at the party meant to celebrate her, and he did it with a smile he'd wear at their wedding 2 months later, the same smile he'd wear cutting a cake with a woman he privately called a cow. I was not going to let that man get a quiet, dignified exit from this family. I was not going to let Arthur and Hilda control the story, soften the blow, spin the narrative into some tasteful little tragedy that painted them as victims of circumstance. I wanted the truth to land exactly where it belonged, on Dustin, in public, at the moment he least expected it, in front of every single person who had watched him charm a room while quietly rotting on the inside. Anita, I said, I need one more favor. Edward, I don't like where your voice just went. I need the paperwork. Official, lab certified, undeniable, and I need you to help me get it in front of 150 guests without anyone knowing what's coming until it's already happened. There was a long pause. You're planning something at the wedding, she said. I'm planning something before the wedding, I said. At the rehearsal dinner, where Arthur gets to give his toast about joining 2 great families. Anita laughed, and it wasn't a kind laugh. It was the laugh of a woman who had spent 18 years watching bad people get exactly what was coming to them, and had genuinely missed the feeling. What do you need from me? She asked. I need you to help me build a slideshow, I said. Crystal found out 3 weeks before the rehearsal dinner. I couldn't carry it alone anymore, and honestly, I owed her the truth before anyone else got it. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, not at first. She sat at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd celebrated Victoria's engagement 6 months earlier, and stared at the folder of documents Anita had compiled. The lab report, the old newspaper clipping about Raymond's construction crew relocating, a copy of a birth certificate from decades ago, and a photograph Anita had dug up of a young Raymond Ellis, standing next to a woman none of us had ever met, holding a baby that would grow up to become Hilda. 28 years, Crystal said quietly, running her thumb over the photograph. He had another daughter for 28 years and never said a word. He wasn't big on saying words, I said. You knew him. I knew he was selfish, Crystal said. I didn't know he was a coward on this scale. We sat there a long time. Crystal got up once, poured herself a glass of water, didn't drink it, and sat back down. I always liked Raymond, in my own way, she said eventually. He was funny at Thanksgiving. He was terrible at everything else. He was terrible at being a father, I said. I spent half my childhood making excuses for him to my own mother. I'm not interested in making any more. I'm not asking you to make excuses, Crystal said. I'm asking what we do now, because this doesn't just affect Dustin. This affects Hilda too. That woman didn't choose to be born into this mess, any more than you chose your father disappearing on you. I know that, I said, and I meant it. Some part of me, even then, felt a flicker of something for Hilda. Not sympathy exactly. More like recognition. 2 people who'd both been shaped by the same careless man without ever getting a say in it. But Hilda isn't the one who called our daughter a cow behind a tent. Dustin is. And I'm not going to let my sympathy for his mother talk me out of doing right by Victoria. Crystal nodded slowly. turning the photograph over in her hands one more time. "What are you going to do?" she finally asked. "I'm going to make sure Victoria finds out before she marries her own cousin," I said. "And I'm going to make sure the man who called our daughter a cow understands exactly what he lost the night he decided to open his mouth." Crystal looked at me for a long moment, and something shifted in her face, grief giving way to something harder, something I recognized because I'd been carrying it for weeks already. "Let me help," she said. We told Victoria 2 weeks before the rehearsal dinner, alone, at our house, with the door closed and every document laid out on the coffee table, like evidence at a trial, because in a way, it was. I won't pretend it was easy. My daughter cried in a way I hadn't seen since she was 7 years old and broke her arm falling off a bike. Not delicate crying. Loud, gutted, disbelieving crying. The kind that comes from somewhere underneath language. "This isn't real," she kept saying. "This isn't, Dad, this can't be real, there has to be a mistake." "I wish there was," I said, and I meant it, because whatever I felt about Dustin, I never wanted my daughter to hurt like this. "How long have you known?" she asked, once the first wave had passed and she was sitting very still, staring at the birth certificate like it might rearrange itself into something less impossible. "A few weeks," I admitted. I wanted to be sure before I said anything. I wanted to have every piece of it nailed down so nobody could tell you it was a mistake, or a misunderstanding, or something we could quietly ignore. "A few weeks." Her voice cracked. "You sat across the dinner table from me a few weeks ago and didn't say anything?" "I know," I said. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to hand you half of a truth. I wanted to hand you the whole thing, all at once, so you'd never have to wonder if there was more." She was quiet for a moment, absorbing that, and I watched her decide, right in front of me, not to be angry with me about the timing. That was Victoria. She could hold two things at once, grief and grace, in a way I never quite learned how to do at her age. "Does he know?" she asked. "Does Dustin know?" "No," I said. "Nobody in his family knows. As far as we can tell, Hilda doesn't even know who her biological father was. Arthur definitely doesn't know, or he wouldn't have let this wedding get this close. So this whole time," Victoria said slowly, "I've been planning a wedding with my own cousin. And he's been planning it too, with no idea, telling his friends I'm a—" She stopped herself, jaw tightening. "You don't have to say it," I said quietly. "I want to say it," she said. "I want to say the word so it stops living rent-free in my chest. He told his friend he'd rather chew glass than touch me. He called me a cow. And the whole time, I was falling asleep next to him, thinking I'd found the person I was going to spend my whole life with." "You were falling asleep next to a decent liar," I said. "That's not a flaw in you, Victoria. That's a skill he's clearly had a lot of practice with." Victoria wiped her face, and something changed in her eyes. The same shift I'd seen in Crystal's, the grief starting to calcify into resolve. "I want to be there when it comes out," she said. "I don't want you protecting me from this. I want to watch it land." I looked at my daughter, 26 years old, and saw for the first time that night that she wasn't broken by this. She was furious. "There's something else," I said carefully. "Something about the party. Something I heard. Before any of this." I told her about the tent, about the champagne glasses, about the words cow and chew glass, and the laugh that came after them. Victoria didn't cry again. She just nodded slowly, like a puzzle piece had finally clicked into a picture she'd been avoiding looking at directly. "Good," she said quietly. "Then he doesn't get to walk away from this looking like the victim." The rehearsal dinner was Hilda's production from start to finish, held at the same rented estate as the engagement party, because apparently there is only one venue in this city good enough for the joining of two great families. String lights again. A four-piece band again. 150 guests in cocktail attire, including Arthur's business partners, Hilda's country club friends, and Jacob, standing near the bar in the same expensive jacket he'd worn to mock my daughter months earlier. I wore the same blazer I'd worn to the engagement party. Crystal noticed and didn't say anything, but she squeezed my hand once as we walked in, the kind of squeeze that means, "I know exactly what this cost you, and I know exactly what it's about to cost him." Victoria walked between us, chin up, wearing a deep green dress instead of anything Hilda had suggested. Because my daughter has never in her life let another woman pick her armor for her. She smiled and greeted guests like nothing at all was wrong, complimented Hilda's centerpieces, let Arthur kiss her on the cheek, and call her our beautiful bride-to-be without so much as a flicker crossing her face. "You sure you're ready for this?" I whispered to her, as the guests took their seats and the band eased into something soft and instrumental. "I've been ready for 2 weeks," Victoria said. "I just needed the room to be full first." Dustin found her before dinner started, all easy smiles, oblivious as a man walking toward a cliff with his eyes closed. "You look incredible," he said, reaching for her hand. "Thank you," Victoria said, letting him take it, her face perfectly, terrifyingly calm. "Enjoy the toast tonight. I hear your father put a lot of thought into it." Anita had rigged the slideshow through the venue's AV system 2 days prior, under the guise of finalizing the wedding video montage, a task Hilda happily handed off to Victoria's aunt, who does this professionally, which was a lie, but a useful one. Anita doesn't do slideshows professionally, she does justice professionally. The slideshow was just the delivery method. Arthur stood at the front of the tent with a microphone, tapping a fork against a champagne glass, his own, untouched by any Dina lab, thankfully, because that man's secrets were about to become plenty public without my help. "Friends, family," Arthur began, beaming, one hand on Dustin's shoulder. "Tonight we celebrate the joining of 2 great families." I caught Crystal's eye across the tent. She nodded once. "Before the happy couple exchanges their vows this weekend," Arthur continued, "we wanted to share something special. A little surprise Hilda and I put together. A look back at the beautiful family this marriage is bringing together." He gestured toward the enormous screen set up behind him, and the lights dimmed, and the crowd let out that soft, warm murmur crowds make when they think they're about to see baby photos and wedding bells. The first few slides were exactly that. Dustin as a toddler, Victoria in a tutu at age 5. Innocent, sweet, exactly what everyone expected. Then the slideshow Anita and I built began. A photograph of Raymond Ellis, young, standing beside a woman named Jemmy Calloway, holding an infant. "Meet the man who started it all, Raymond Ellis." A murmur went through the crowd, confused, not yet alarmed. The next slide showed a copy of a birth certificate, blown up large enough for the back row to read. His daughter, Hilda, born 28 years ago, kept secret for a lifetime. I watched Hilda's face from across the tent. I watched the exact moment her expression cracked, watched her hand fly up to her mouth, watched Arthur turn to her with a question forming on his face that he clearly hadn't had time to ask yet. The next slide was the lab report. Official letterhead. Certified results. Blown up so large that 150 guests could read. In stark black print, the words paternal grandchild match confirmed. Which makes Dustin the grandson of Raymond Ellis, AN the first cousin of his own bride. The tent went dead silent. The specific silence of 150 people simultaneously doing math they never wanted to do. Dustin's face had gone the color of the tablecloths. He turned toward Victoria, standing near the front, calm in a way that must have terrified him more than tears would have. This is a joke," Dustin said, his voice cracking down the middle. "This has to be some kind of sick joke." "It's not a joke," I said, walking forward, taking the microphone gently from Arthur's slack hand. Arthur didn't resist. Arthur looked like a man who had aged 10 years in the last 30 seconds. I turned to face the crowd. 150 faces stared back at me, and for the first time in my life, I felt no fear standing in front of a room. "My name is Edward Ellis," I said. "I'm Victoria's father. Some of you know me as the guy who parks the ugly sedan out front and doesn't say much at these things. I have a confession. I heard something at the engagement party 2 months ago that I never told anyone." "Dustin, you remember what you told your friend Jacob behind the tent that night?" Dustin's face went from pale to something closer to gray. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "You said you'd rather chew glass than touch my daughter," I said, and my voice didn't shake. "Not once. You called her a cow." Your friend laughed. I stood there and I didn't say a word, because I wanted to find out exactly who I was dealing with before I said anything at all. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Somewhere near the back, I heard someone say Jacob's name in a tone that suggested his invitation to future gatherings had just been permanently revoked. So I did some digging, I continued, and it turns out the universe has a sense of humor, because the man who insulted my daughter behind a tent is the same man who's biologically her first cousin. Same grandfather. My father Raymond, who apparently had a habit of disappearing on families he didn't think were worth staying for. I looked directly at Dustin. You don't get to marry my daughter, I said. Not because of the Dina, though that's reason enough. You don't get to marry her because of what you said about her when you thought no one who mattered was listening. That tells me everything I need to know about who you actually are, underneath the trust fund and the charm. The tent was in chaos by then. Hilda had sat down hard in a folding chair, her sunglasses finally off, her face raw in a way I doubt anyone had seen in years. Arthur was talking rapidly into his phone to someone. Probably a lawyer, probably his own mother. I honestly didn't care. Jacob had already slipped out a side flap of the tent. Coward's exit. Exactly what I expected from a man who laughs at other people's cruelty. Victoria walked up beside me. She didn't take the microphone. She didn't need to. She looked at Dustin with an expression I will remember for the rest of my life. Not devastated, not broken, but finished. The way you look at a door you're closing for good. I hope the money was worth it, she said quietly, just loud enough for the front rows to hear. Because you just lost a wife who actually would have loved you. Over a joke you made to sound impressive to a friend who ran the second things got hard. She slid the engagement ring off her finger and set it, gently, deliberately, on the linen tablecloth in front of him. Then she turned, took my arm, and we walked out of that tent together, Crystal falling into step on my other side. The three of us leaving Arthur and Hilda to explain to 150 stunned guests exactly how their golden boy's wedding had just ended in the same breath his family's secrets did. The wedding, obviously, never happened. What did happen, in the weeks that followed, was worse for Dustin than any cancelled ceremony could have been. Arthur's business partners, the ones who'd been sipping champagne under those string lights, started asking quiet questions about what else the family might have buried over the years. A man who could hide a daughter for 28 years, they reasoned, might hide other things too. Inconvenient debts, questionable deals, the kind of skeletons that make investors nervous. 2 of his biggest partnerships dissolved within the month. I heard, secondhand, that the country club membership Arthur loved bragging about was quietly under review. Hilda, from what Anita could gather, spent weeks trying to track down more information about Raymond, about the woman named Jemmy Calloway, about the childhood she never knew she was denied. Anita told me Jemmy was still alive, living quietly in a small house 2 states over, and that Hilda had driven out to meet her the month after the rehearsal dinner collapsed her whole world. How did it go? I asked Anita, who still had a source or two willing to talk. About how you'd expect, Anita said. Jemmy cried. Hilda cried. 60-some years of silence doesn't undo itself in one afternoon. But from what I heard, they're talking now. Regularly, I felt something for Hilda, honestly. She wasn't the one who'd insulted my daughter behind a tent wall. She was, in her own way, another one of my father's casualties. A woman who'd spent her whole life not knowing why she never felt like she quite belonged anywhere. But I didn't reach out. Some bridges are better left unbuilt, especially when the family on the other side spent 30 years pretending money made them better than everyone standing under their string lights. Victoria felt differently, in the end. 2 months after the rehearsal dinner, she sent Hilda a single message. No anger in it. Just a short note saying she hoped Hilda found peace with what she'd learned about her own father, and that none of what happened was Hilda's fault. Hilda never replied. Victoria said she didn't need her to. She'd said what she needed to say, and that was enough. You're a better person than me, I told her when she mentioned it. No, Victoria said. I just don't want to carry any more weight than I have to. I already dropped the heaviest thing I was carrying on that tablecloth in front of 150 people. Everything else I can let go of on my own terms. Dustin tried calling Victoria exactly 4 times in the 2 weeks after the rehearsal dinner. She didn't answer once. On the 5th attempt, she blocked his number entirely and didn't so much as flinch doing it. He tried a different approach after that. Showed up at the hospital where she worked, waited in the parking lot after her shift like he was starring in some movie where the grand gesture wins the girl back. Victoria called security before he'd even finished his first sentence. He said he wanted to explain. She told me that night, sitting at our kitchen table, still in her scrubs. Explain what, exactly? That he's not really my cousin. He just happens to share a grandfather with me? Or that the cow comment was a joke that got taken out of context? What did you say to him? I asked. I told him security was already walking over, and that he had about 4 seconds to decide if he wanted to leave on his own, or leave in a very different kind of car. She almost smiled. He left on his own. Arthur called our house twice, trying to smooth things over in that particular way wealthy men do when they think a problem can be handled, with the right amount of charm and the right number of zeros. I let both calls go to voicemail. There is nothing Arthur could offer that would undo what his son said behind a tent wall, and nothing he could say that would make me forget the sound of his own family's foundation cracking in real time in front of 150 guests. "You're not sorry I did what I did," I said to her one night. Weeks later, the two of us sitting on the back porch with 2 glasses of iced tea instead of champagne. "No," Victoria said. "I'm sorry it took me this long to see him clearly. But I'm not sorry about how it ended." "No regrets?" She thought about it for a moment, watching the sun go down over a quiet street 2 states and a lifetime away from that rented tent. "The only thing I regret," she said, "is not being the one to set the trap myself." I laughed, and for the first time in months, it was an easy laugh, not the tight, performing kind I'd been wearing since the night I overheard 4 words through a canvas wall. Crystal came out with a 3rd glass of tea and sat between us. "Your father would be furious," she said to me, "watching you turn his worst secret into somebody else's downfall." "My father," I said, "spent his whole life running from consequences. I figured it was about time somebody in this family finally delivered some." "You know," Crystal said, tracing the condensation on her glass with one finger, "for a man who insists he's not the vengeful type, you built a slideshow that ended an engagement, humiliated a millionaire in front of his own business partners, and got a man's country club membership pulled, all without raising your voice once." "I never claimed to be a saint," I said. "I claimed to be a father. Turns out, those aren't always the same thing." Victoria laughed at that, a real laugh, the first one I'd heard from her in weeks that didn't have some grief threaded underneath it. "For what it's worth," she said, looking out at the darkening yard, "I think Grandpa Raymond finally did something useful. 28 years too late, and completely by accident, but useful." "Don't give him too much credit," I said. "He didn't do anything. He just couldn't stop being a coward, and eventually his cowardice caught up with the people who deserved to know the truth. That's not the same as doing something good. That's just consequences finally arriving late to a party he wasn't invited to." We sat there until the sky went fully dark, the 3 of us not saying much else because we didn't need to. Somewhere, 100 miles away, in a house with a country club membership under review, and a fiancé-turned-stranger who would never take his calls again, Dustin was learning the same lesson my father never did, that the things you say when you think no one who matters is listening have a way of finding their way back to the people who matter most. Some words, once spoken, cannot be unsaid, and some fathers, once pushed too far, do not forgive. I never did. And I never will.